Meanwhile, China's ailing banking sector is back in the news. Last month, 2 banks in the US collapsed. It snowballed into a global crisis. Depositors lost access to their money, at least temporarily. One major European bank had to be sold. Credit Suisse was bought by its rival UBS. There was widespread panic, and it seems that crisis is not over yet. The next in line could be Chinese banks, because China's banking sector remains vulnerable. According to some assessments, they're doing worse than their Western counterparts. The crisis began last year. You may remember this. There were multiple bank runs in China. As many as 5 banks had collapsed. 4 were in Henan and 1 was in the eastern province of Anhui. Going by one estimate, at least 400,000 customers were affected. Their deposits were frozen. More than 1 year has passed. Many depositors say they still haven't got their money back. Now, we don't have a number, but reports say it runs into thousands, meaning thousands of people still have not got their deposits in China. And recently, some of them dared to protest. They took to the streets and they demanded their money. Now, we're not sure if they got it, but we do hope that the protesters are safe, because China does not take kindly to such actions. Last year, when some depositors protested, the state cracked down hard on them. Cops and thugs turned up in plain clothes. They beat up the protesters. More than 200 arrests were made. For what crime? These people just want their hard-earned money back, but the Chinese state is punishing them for asking. What does the law say? If a bank fails in China, the depositors are entitled to a basic payment, a payment of up to 500,000 yuan, that's 73,000 US dollars. That's the bare minimum every depositor is entitled to get. If they had less in deposits, they will be made whole. If they had more, they should get at least $73,000 at the very least. But that's only on paper, it seems. In practice, they're not getting any money. And the reason is this. The banks that failed last year had risky assets. They took money from depositors and gambled with it. Now, those risky assets have collapsed, so the banks have collapsed, and the people have nowhere to go. What's worse, the crisis is getting bigger. China fears that more banks could meet the same fate. There are around 4,000 such lenders. They hold about 25% of China's banking industry assets. When you look closely at these banks, many red flags pop up. Their ownership structure is opaque. Experts say these banks are vulnerable to corruption. They may not be able to withstand adverse events like an economic slowdown. So the smaller banks are on shaky ground. What about the bigger players? Well, they're not immune either, we are told. China's big banks are vulnerable too. In January, a report had come out. It was about Chinese banks that are quote-unquote too big to fail. Apparently, they have a $550 billion hole. I'm talking about the 4 biggest banks in China: the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, the China Construction Bank Corp., the Agricultural Bank of China, and the Bank of China. They're said to be precariously poised. Their ability to cushion a loss is being questioned. Reports say these banks need $550 billion more to manage any potential losses. They're being forced to make some tough calls, like selling bonds to make up for the funding gap. And this was the situation in the month of January. We are now in the month of April, and China's banking sector is still showing signs of stress. Where and in what form will it end? We'll be tracking.